Good morning, church. This is hard stuff. We've been on this journey of Lent, and I don't know how you avoid this. This is part of the story. In fact, if we're serious about following Jesus, we have to follow him into the places we might not rather go. But we follow him into these places because it's a story that we need to live out, and it's our story. It's his gift to us as well. So we're talking about scars, and we're dealing with the premise, the fact that every scar has a story. Every scar is a story. And remarkably, in the Gospels, Jesus shows us his own scars. We start from the end and we work backwards. We already know this story, so when you do that in reverse chronology, you're able to see things you haven't seen before. It's a premise that when somebody tells you to look for something, you begin to see it over and over again. I think it's like the Godfather principle. I don't know if you watch Godfather movies or not. I'd watched them for years, didn't realize that whenever you see an orange, somebody's about to die. Now when you watch a Godfather movie, you can't help. Every time an orange pops up, you see it clearly. You just didn't see it before. Somebody pointed it out. So when we talk about the scars, we're talking about those things that wound us, hurt us deeply. And maybe this is the biggest cut of all. That's to lose somebody that you love, somebody you love dearly. We're going to look at that in a moment. I want to say just a quick word also about Beyond the Bunny, our Easter celebration. If you were with us last year, when I say it was overwhelming, it was overwhelming. We had about 3,000 people here, which was wonderful. We all felt really good about it, but then we began to look back over it, and it was just a lot of chaos. I think a lot of kids came and had a good time, but that's not really the mission of the church, is to provide a good time. We want them to have a good time. We want all our kids to have a good time, but our mission is to help make disciples of Jesus Christ, to help people grow in their faith. And so this year, I just want you to be aware, we're doing something intentional, a little more strategic. We're going to really focus on people, and we're going to focus on telling the story so that our kids know the story. Love for them to have an Easter egg hunt. They're going to have an Easter egg hunt. They'll have fun, but what I want, what all of us want, for them to walk away knowing that Jesus loves them. And this is a story that is their story, and they need to hear it as well. So if you find out we didn't have 3,000 people here, don't be disappointed. That's actually a good thing, I think, in some respect, because the people who come are going to be a part of our congregation and a part of the learning and part of the discipling as well. So thank you for all the things you do to make that happen as well. Again, this is the hard stuff, so let's dig into it as we bow our heads. God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It's a lady named Sherry Ellis who lives in Magnolia, Texas, about 200 miles south of Arlington. And she went to a CVS, presented her credit card, and it was declined. She was perplexed because she always paid her bills. Went to the bank to see if there was a problem. The bank looked, and the person looked up at her and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but our system says you died. And she said, well, obviously I haven't. I'm right here. He did some more digging into it. She had to go to the Social Security Administration, and it turns out about 14,000 people a year are declared dead by the Social Security Administration. It's called death by keystroke. It's an accidental. Somebody sits at a computer, hits the wrong button, and declares you dead. You know how hard it is to prove that you're alive? Sherry Ellis figured it out. She said she couldn't get access to anything. She said her whole life was terrible. In fact, I love her language. She said they couldn't do anything until Medicare decides to resurrect me. I love that language. She understands what it means. Sherry Ellis is an outlier because she's trying to prove that she's alive, but you and I are talking about something different than just that, because she's an outlier. When it's real, it's real. When you love and lose people, it may be the most painful thing that you'll ever deal with. You realize in life, none of us get out of here without being marked in some way by loss. And maybe this is the deepest cut of all, to actually love somebody so deeply and then stand by and watch them slip away from you. And each one of you have your own story. And the stories are different in detail, but they go something like this. Some of you, it was unexpected. The person that you loved, you didn't sense anything was wrong. You weren't prepared for it. You got a phone call. You found out, and it shocked you to the core of your being. You didn't have time to prepare for it. You didn't have the chance to say goodbye. And there's this feeling of emptiness and something that is unresolved in you because you just didn't have that chance. And then others will tell me the same story, but with different details, meaning they knew because there was a long, protracted illness, which means at least you had the time to say goodbye. It didn't make it any easier. maybe in some ways made it harder. But you went through and you watched somebody that you loved and you prayed as hard as you could, and no matter what happened, they just simply slipped away from you, and you still carry those scars with you. Because scars never go away, they just remain with you. And even though they're a sign of healing and a reminder that we all need grace, they still stay with us. It's a sign that something hurt us deeply, something wounded us. And every time we look at somebody that we have lost and loved, there are triggers that happen. You know it comes upon you, it sneaks up on you sometimes. You come across a pair of old shoes, or you see an old photograph, or you open up a closet and see some clothes that are still there, or you maybe see an empty chair at a table, and it just comes flooding back to you that this person who you thought was so central to your life, who meant the world to you, is no longer with you. What I appreciate of the Bible is it does not whitewash the reality, the hard truth about losing people. It doesn't try to mollify it by saying some helpless cliche. It tells you the honest to God, hurtful truth of losing people. So Mary and Martha are sisters. Their brother Lazarus is ill, and not just sick, he's dying. And so what do? The friend that they love, the one they believe in, Jesus, they send word as quickly as they could, come, please hurry, Lazarus needs you. And they send the message to Jesus, and what does Jesus do? He waits. He doesn't do anything. He lets the days go by. He arrives on the fourth day. It's important because the fourth day represents the day of hopelessness. Rabbis would say that if a body was dead for 3 days, the spirit would still hover around, but on the fourth day it would vacate. There's no chance of resuscitation. Fourth day is that day after the third day, meaning third day, Old and New Testament. That's when God creates. That's when God acts. On the third day, on the third day, he rose from the grave. Third day is everything. God is in the midst of it. On the fourth day, it's a day of hopelessness. Jesus intentionally waits till the fourth day to come. Comes on the fourth day, and he knows that Lazarus is already dead. And he bears the anger of Martha, who says, I think one of the most honest statements, Jesus, if you'd have been here, my brother would not have died. And I'm always intrigued by the people who collected the material to put into the Bible would say they didn't vet that out, they didn't discard it, they wanted to include it. And if you really want to put Jesus in the best light possible, you might want to clean it up and say, let's not have that part of it. But this is the same Bible who has Jesus hanging on a cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Meaning it's brutally honest. It allows it to stay in there because it's life. It's what the questions we would ask. It's how we might respond in the same situation. If you'd only been here, my brother would not have died. Where were you when I needed you? I called you, I begged you to come, and you took your sweet time. And I think it's as brutally honest and as raw and as real as anything we'll ever read. What it says in the midst of your grief, I think it tells us just be honest. Name it, say it. Whatever you feel, make sure it's real. Because you and I have been there, you've prayed for the people that you love, and they're sick, and you know they're slipping away from you, and you pray every deepest prayer you can, and you do it as best you can, and no matter how much you pray, it doesn't really change things. They slip away from you, and you don't understand why. But I think the hardest prayer in the Bible is not, oh God, please don't let this thing happen. I think the hardest prayer for any of us is not my will, but thy will be done. Because in the moment we're able to say that prayer that Jesus himself offered, it means we let go of control. We mean saying, I don't understand this, but I trust you. I don't want this to happen. It's my worst nightmare. Please, God, if there's any way, don't let this happen. But if it does, I still believe and I still have hope. Mary says, and Martha, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. And then Jesus says a strange thing in response to that. He says, I am the resurrection and I am life. He doesn't say, well, Martha, let me tell you about the concept of the resurrection. Or let me tell you, one of these days you're going to see him again in heaven. No, he says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Right now, right here, wherever I am, there is life and there is hope and there is goodness. And so Jesus stands at the tomb of Lazarus, as Carly just talked about, and he weeps. Incredible insight into the compassion of Jesus and how much he cares, how much he loves. Just this 2-word sentence, he wept. Meaning standing over the grave of his friend Lazarus, and something inside of him begins to surface and it wells up inside of him. So why does he cry? I think there's a reason why he cries, because it's personal, it's real. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what he's about to do. He knows he has the power to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he still weeps. Why does he weep? I think he weeps for Lazarus, but I think he weeps for all of us. I think he weeps for you and I think he weeps for Mary and Martha, anybody who's going through a difficult time, because that's who he is. I think when we hurt, he hurts. When we weep, he weeps. I think he feels our pain. He knows what we're going through. And it's not this abstract Savior. It's one who comes to be like us, to be with us in our deepest pain, in whatever journey this world has to offer us. And when our hearts are broken, so is his. I think he just weeps out of compassion because he knows what it feels like to lose someone. I think he also weeps for Lazarus, just in a strange way, thinking, I'm going to bring him back to life, but guess what? I'm going to bring him back to this. I mean, you've seen some of the near-death experiences where people are almost reluctant to come back. It means Lazarus are going to bring you out of the grave, and then everybody's going to attack you. You can't walk 2 steps without somebody saying, weren't you the one who died? What's it like to die? What's on the other side? What did you see? What do you know? In all of his life, he has religious authorities trying to kill him because they want to silence him as a witness, because they want eventually to get to Jesus. I think he weeps for Lazarus, meaning I'm going to bring you back to this life, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be harder than you ever experienced in your life. And I think the last one is he just weeps for himself. John's gospel is clear about this. This is what triggers the religious authorities now in John's gospel to go after Jesus. And what Jesus is staring at the tomb is his own tomb. He knows that if Lazarus comes out of a tomb, he's going to go into a tomb. He knows it's going to cost him his life. He knows he's going to be arrested. He knows he's going to be tortured. He knows this is the moment. He stares into the tomb and he sees the future for himself, and he weeps for it. And then Jesus does and says those words, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come out. And he comes out. And he's wrapped from head to toe in the bandage. And I love this line, unbind him and let him go. Incredible word, freedom and liberation. I've actually been to the tomb of Lazarus. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. If you go to Israel, you can go to what they purport to be the tomb of Lazarus. I will tell you, it is very small. In fact, you can only go in one at a time, the narrow entrance. They've got a guardrail or a little rail there, but it's a steep climb, but it's such a small little opening. And the fact of the matter is, when you come out, you have to be very careful not to scrape your feet. You have to bend over, you have to come out of it. And I love what somebody wrote about it. It's the same experience. When they came out of this Lazarus tomb, they realized that Lazarus didn't come forth out of the tomb like a prisoner being released. Came out like a baby being born again. It means you're just coming back into life. And I wish I had thought about this before, but I realized when Lazarus, who's dead now, is brought back to life, and he comes out of the tomb, and who does he see in the first moment? He sees Jesus. And somebody said, I bet in that moment he was wondering which side of heaven he was on, which is really confusing, but also very liberating as well. I remember talking to a woman who had lost her son, and it's a church that about every month we'd read the Apostles' Creed. And she would read it just like all of us do, the resurrection of the body. And she came up to me and she said, after my son died, I can't hear it the same way. When I hear the resurrection of the body, I don't just read words on a paper. I read a promise. And the promise to me is it's saying you're going to see your son again in a place called heaven. And everything you ever believed or ever taught, everything you long for is true. That one day, when you close your eyes for the last time and open them again, your son will be there to tell you, welcome home. I think sometimes we run away from this idea of mortality, and I think the Bible invites us because in a strange way, as dark and as filled with grief as it is the way in which you get to the resurrection. There are no shortcuts. And it gives you a sense of the incredible sense of a gift of life. That if you act as if we're going to live forever then we will make different choices. But if we have a sense of our own mortality, a healthy sense, we'll know that we won't take a day for granted, that we'll live into our fullest. The CEO and founder of Panera Bread, Ron Shaich, has done something for the last 30 years. He sits down every year at the same time and he writes his own obituary, which I find fascinating. And he said, because I want every year to make sure I'm on the right track. My relationship with my family, my community, who I am as a person of faith, and my integrity, and all those things. And he's writing the obituary as if he wants to put down on words what people will say about him and know about him and miss about him, and he wants to make sure he lives fully into those words. He writes his own obituary, which is what people of faith do. We don't run away from it. We embrace it. We run toward it because we know it gives us the freedom to make sure that every single day is important. So the last song at the Last Supper, when you go and hear this story, he's going to gather around a table with the people that he loves most in this world to say goodbye. It's the last time they'll ever be together. And he gathers them around the table, and there's this one little notation that I'm always intrigued about, is after they've broken bread, after they've washed feet, it says that they go into the night and they were singing hymns. And I think to myself, so what are they singing? And if you do a deep dive on what they were singing, you can come to a pretty logical conclusion. One, it's amazing that they're singing hymns as they are walking into the darkest night with Jesus fully knowing what is awaiting him. The disciples are going to scatter. They're going to betray him. They're going to go into the night, but for one last moment, the last time they're together, they sing this song together. They raise their voices. In Jewish tradition, it's called the Great Hallel, and part of it encompasses Psalm 118, and we know that it's a song to be sung in that kind of venue at that kind of time. And Psalm 118 includes these words: "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. You are my God, and I will praise you. You are my God, I will exalt you. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever." And I think that's it. I think if you knew you were going to die, you'd want to squeeze every last drop. You'd want to have this one day, my one more day, that the deepest prayer is that would be that one day I would take, not for granted, but would take everything from it and hold on to it and breathe it in deeply. That you don't run away from it, that you know it in the midst of your own mortality. You would sing a song of praise to God and thanksgiving, that you would hold on to the blessings and let go of everything else. You and I have something in common. We have scars, scars that we see, scars that we don't see, and scars that we don't see are just as real as the ones, and you carry them with you. And you just think about the person that you have loved more than anything else in this world, because if you haven't, you will. And those of us who have can look and sort of think for a moment, and we'll know their name, and we'll hear their voice. I want you to think about that person, because it's very real. And that person meant more to you than you could possibly say. And when they died, a piece of you died with them. And the world seems a little more empty because they're not here anymore. The light doesn't shine quite as brightly because they're no longer remaining with you. So what if you and I actually believed in the resurrection? What if you actually believed that you will see them again? What would you want to say to them? What would you want to say to that person that's in your mind right now, the person that you love so much who's no longer with you? And if you could stand in front of them and if they could hear you, what would you say to them? I think you'd say, "Thank you. You brought more life and joy in this world than I could ever express." I think you'd also say to them, "I really wish you were here. I miss you. I think about you all the time. I wish more than anything we could just have one more day together." When Jesus brought Lazarus back to life, he says, "Unbind him and let him go." May he do the same for us. Every scar has a story. Every scar is a story. And Jesus remarkably shows us his scars.